Tomorrow is my 76th revolution around the sun. And that's the way.
It's your birthday tomorrow?
My birthday is tomorrow. I will be, I don't even think of it the way other people.
76?
76.
Look at you.
How does it, how does it happen?
I swear, I've never bought in. I'm telling you the truth. I do not buy into the numbers. So I have been living at a high energy for a long time.
That's why it's there.
So, yeah.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's the 19th of January 2018, and our special guest today is the dynamic, Emmy Award-winning author, lecturer, truth speaker, and UFO researcher into what she refers to as the alien presence on planet Earth, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you very much for joining us, Linda Moulton Howe. It's absolutely wonderful to be here in Albuquerque in your home, and thank you for inviting us to do this interview. It's great.
Well, Lucas, I thank you, because I think it is in exactly these kinds of discussions with people who are trying to get to the bottom of real facts and real truth that the whole world can begin to be educated together with you, with me, because governments are locked into policies of lies and denial. And the truth is, what you're countering, we're living on a concocted planet, concocted in policies by governments and 1% against the general human family knowing the truth and the facts. And one of those facts that has been with this planet for millennia, not just centuries. We're not alone in this universe. And this planet has been host to a number of what government people use this phrase, an alien presence. And in that definition of alien presence, there might be 20 different non-human entities. And we're at a point in the beginning of 2018, I have tried for 39 years, since 1979, to get to the bottom of what is the truth about what is behind animal mutilations, human abductions, and why is it that military and government agents in the United States will even tap my phone. I'm an American citizen. I'm supposed to be in a government of, by, and for the people. And I have lived a life where I have grown up as an American citizen in which the government was supposed to be the employee of us, the population. And now in January of 2018, it is upside down. And all Americans know we're struggling for facts. This is not fake news. We are struggling to lift up the policies of lies and denial and understand, perhaps for the very first time on the planet, an alien presence, by definition, to people that I have talked to in the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Reconnaissance Organization, and there are a lot of other agencies. They will look you right in the eye and say, the truth is, we're not alone in this universe. We never have been. And one man from the Defense Intelligence Agency said, Linda, we have proof in the United States government that there have been 3 competing geopolitical, territorial, conflicting intelligences using, mining, harvesting, and interacting on this planet and in this solar system for at least 270 million years. And when I said, "Sir, that's before the time of the dinosaurs." And there was a pause. He didn't break eye contact with me. And he said, "Linda, one of these groups made the dinosaurs in an 80 million year long experiment." Those are the discussions that I have had since 1979, when I grew up in a very normal, going through school, getting married, having a child, working in television as my profession. I did all of the medical programming for the ABC television network in Boston. I had come from Stanford University, where I got a master's degree in communication. My master's thesis was with the Stanford Linear Accelerator, and it's hard to believe now, but when I graduated from Stanford University with my master's degree in 1968, and my film was about the very first effort to get computers to analyze the bombardments at the subatomic level at the Stanford Linear Accelerator. It was just beginning in 1968. So over the last 40 some years, I have grown up with this background of I wanted to understand the subatomic world, and I did a picture calculus at Stanford. I loved medicine and science. I did a film with the Stanford Medical Center that was part of my work at Stanford, and they ended up using my film for 19 years. And 19 years later, I received a beautiful letter from Stanford University thanking me as a master's student for doing a film that they used at the Stanford Medical Center. And from Stanford, I married and went to Los Angeles, and I had a family, and I was working in television, and I was doing environment, science, and big issue programs. I was doing street reporting, and then I was doing live studios, and then I was doing documentaries, which is where I started at Stanford.
And that was as a journalist. And that was
an investigative reporter.
Exactly. And that led you on that path to get into this world of UFO research and the alien presence. How many alien species and races do you know of or have you heard of? How many different types are there? And are they visiting Earth?
The best reference to breaking down a taxonomy on non-humans is in an alleged briefing paper for President Ronald Reagan, March 6 to 8, 1981. It was released in 2000, and I think it was 6, to the serpo.org. Serpo.org has been on the web allegedly revealing from military sources various pieces of the alien presence story on Earth. I took the transcript of this alleged President Ronald Reagan briefing at Camp David and asked, we'll call it a trusted colleague in Washington, D.C., if they could find out, did this happen? Did Ronald Reagan go to Camp David March 6 to 8, 1981? Was he briefed by William Casey, who he appointed to be the director of the CIA? And the answer back to me was yes, this is accurate. In this briefing for Ronald Reagan, you have the director of the CIA, you have people there from NSA, from DIA, you have a man called the caretaker. There's a group. And they introduced to President Ronald Reagan that they are dealing with 5 different alien species.
Only 5?
This briefing to Reagan. And the astonishing part of this in 81 to the president is the top one is the EBEN, extraterrestrial biological entity, as the government came to call them. No Greek or Latin name. And the EBEN has a pear-shaped head with a chin.
What is known as the Greys, right?
No.
No?
Greys are like when we say we're going to Xerox or we're going to get a Kleenex. You could have 1,000 different Xerox machines, 1,000 different makers of Kleenex. but we call it Kleenex or Xerox. It's the same that this word has come to mean.
But that
Gray.
type of look that we have seen also
Well,
in films and
There is a big difference if you're in the military or you're in MJ-12 about the agendas depending upon the physiognomy and whether you're dealing with a prime intelligence, whether you're dealing with a hybrid, whether you're dealing with a clone, or whether you're dealing with a cyborg.
yes.
And any and all of the so-called generic grays could be in any of those categories, and I'm talking about a prime intelligence that makes the other clones, hybrids, and cyborg.
Who would they be?
I'm talking about the Ebens right
Yeah,
now. I'm
yeah,
talking they're at the top of the list.
Yeah.
They're the ones our own government says.
So they're not cloned.
No. A prime intelligence is its own unique life form that can make all these others. So they're starting with the Ebens, but they have a very specific head shape. It's not at all like this. It is a pear-shaped, and they don't have black lenses. They have rounder eyes, and they are usually considered to be dark brown with, the vertical pupil seems to come up sometimes, putting it into a reptilian
Are
category.
they reptilian? Yeah,
I
that was
don't
my
know.
question.
I do not know, because the Ebens are described as being, quote unquote, allies of the American military and intelligence. But every person who's ever described even having a meeting with them says, but they lie. Okay.
The Ebens lie.
The Ebens lie. We can say that we will lie to a child about why we're going to the doctor. So I always hold the door out that if the pear-shaped 5'2" to 5'3", gray-skinned, but often it is a leotard. It is a tight leotard that has been found only in surgery and not skin. We relate to a skin. Well, what if I had on a actual manufactured that can repel machine guns, and you sitting here could not tell any part of me was covered by an artificial construct? That's part of the Eben technology world.
So is that like shape-shifting?
No. They know how.
It's a coding.
Yeah. And it was discovered in one of the very first autopsies at Wright-Patterson. When they took the scalpel, thinking they were dealing with skin, the scalpel wouldn't cut. And that's when they realized what they thought was skin was some kind of protective covering. Okay, these are the Ebens. Mm-hmm. Very sophisticated technologies. Holograms, neutralized gravity, invisibility, a lot of their technology.
And we don't know
back
what type they are of species. We don't know that.
They're
what
supposed
that
to
is.
come from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. That's supposed to be their home planet, the same one that Betty and Barney Hill dealt with in New Hampshire in '61, the first abduction case. And there was a three-dimensional holographic map, and Betty was able, under hypnosis, to remember things in such detail that she could draw what she saw in this hologram.
And she described and drew that star
Yeah,
map.
she also did drawings of what she was dealing with. But that is one of the most amazing cases of all time, because an amateur astronomer took on to try to see if they did three-dimensional beads. Could they find anything in the local, within 20 light years of Earth, that would resemble what Betty drew? And she did. And that is the famous discovery of Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 as a binary star system, very much like our own yellow system. And then today we know that there are a whole garden variety of yellow suns in an area within, say, 15 to 20 light years of our planet, where in abduction cases like Betty and Barney Hill, Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 has come up, Epsilon Eridani has come up, Epsilon Bootes. So now we have a framework in which the abduction syndrome introduces to investigators, and the government is listening to all of this, that within our surrounding neighborhood, people are interacting with beings, some of them pear-shaped heads with gray covering, that seem to be coming from some place within what we will call our little arm of the Milky Way galaxy.
So those Ebens are they're not good, are they?
This is the complexity. Is there anybody who knows the truth about what any given non-human that has been photographed or sketched, what is their true source and what is their true agenda? And what I'm sharing is that in the Reagan briefing, they start with the Ebens. And the Ebens dominate in many ways because if they are making, which is my understanding, the Ebens can take genetic material from anything and make any kind of a clone. They work with hybrids. They create cyborg. Cyborg could be taking you and actually taking your arm off and putting in an advanced technology so that your arms would be stronger, keeping your core. That would be a cyborg that the Greys could do, the Gray Ebens. On the next two, on this list of 5, the second one, the Archeloids, are defined as being androids created by the Ebens. The Archeloids have very large noses. They have domed heads. They wear ropey headdresses. They have vertical pupilled eyes. They have a small, narrow chin, receding, and they carry a rod. And the rod has a spiral around it. And the rod is introduced to our government as this is our translation communicator.
So are those the ones that are working behind our government?
What I think is the most interesting part of the Archeloid to the Eben, the Archeloid was created by the Ebens, and they seed planets with their genetic creations. So the closest match in Earth history to the Archeloids are the Sumerians. When you look into the stone,
The Archeloids, are they reptilian?
those vertical
Mammalian.
pupils suggest reptilian. But now you get into if things are genetically mixed and matched. What if they have taken genes from an alligator, a monkey, primate, an insect, a whole bunch of genes, and they end up with a sophisticated android. Android is a biological robot.
With their own soul life?
There's not one proof that these beings have souls. Homo sapien have souls.
What about the reptilians? A lot of people all over the world who's investigating these things and these topics are talking about the reptilians and their collaboration with the New World Order and the government structure around the world. Is that something you know anything about? And if you can please talk a little bit about that, how that is connected and how evolved those reptilians are. Are they primarily bad? Who are they?
A man who retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which has been one of the biggest players in the UFO ET phenomena, even if the world doesn't understand. In the United States, the oldest is the CIA because it was formed in September of 1947 by Harry S. Truman. And what people don't realize is that when it was formed specifically because of the crashes in New Mexico in 47.
Who were real?
They're non-humans, and the craft were mind-blowing. And they came in different shapes. I have talked with people who were there. I have talked with people who saw the bodies. I have talked with people who have seen the craft, and they weren't round and they weren't discs. They were shaped like the wedges of a piece of pie, but they were swoopy. So it's a shape like this, and that's why they're not technically called triangles. A triangle has 3 even vertices.
Right.
If you take something, then you cut it like a piece of pie, you're cutting a triangle, a triangular shape, but it has depth, and if it has a swoopy surface, that explains why all of the documents that are absolutely real, confirmed by our own government, that talked about plan forms, PLANFORMS, were retrieved from 3 different landing sites in New Mexico between July 2nd and July 4th, 1947. The plan form is a triangular body, but it has swoopy and fins, and General Twining was the first person assigned by President Harry Truman to go on behalf of the President of the United States personally to examine the craft that came down in July of 47, and General Nathan Twining's report back to Truman, every human on the planet, it should be required reading. Because here is a general who is extremely bright, and he is giving a report.
How can we know that what the government and what official papers say, even the Freedom of the Information Act, how can we know that's real?
Which didn't come into being until middle 70s.
Right, okay. But even before that, because that's even just around 70 years ago or something.
70 is, yeah, well, you go back 70 years to the end of World War II.
Which is not a lot. Which is not a lot in the bigger scale. How can we know if any of those documents are real? What are facts? What can be manufactured?
Because they've been leaked. We have leaked documents.
But could they have been leaked in order for intelligence services to implement the idea that human beings should fear an alien takeover or an alien invasion, like what Dr. Werner von Braun said before he passed away, that would be the New World Order's big scare tactic eventually to gain full global control?
In your question is a contradiction.
All right.
Because from World War II, and the end of World War II was 45, we already know from all kinds of sources that we had retrieved 2 clone bodies and a wedge-shaped plan-form craft from Missouri. In 1941, no one anywhere, except for the locals, that didn't penetrate, not any media. Okay, so 41 to July 47. What was before July 47 by 2 weeks? June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold up in Washington State says he sees 9 what? You look at the drawings he made, they were plan forms in triangular shapes. 9 of them. That was the famous interview where Kenneth Arnold, the insurance guy, says it looked like flying saucers that you would skip across a pond. 2 weeks later, after Kenneth Arnold had done that and UFO now is blazing, we have the July 2nd to July 4th of the alleged, our government kept it to 1 crash because of the mistake that was made in the Roswell Army Airfield when Colonel Blanchard, the head of the RAAF, innocently went to one of his PR people and said, we need to get in touch with the telegraph office and send out a notice that we have one of these flying saucers. has come down between Roswell and Corona.
But even if people have seen that, which of course leads us to believe that there are aliens and there are UFOs and these crafts, we are still talking about government papers and leaked papers from government officials. How can we know for sure that that is fact? Even if the alien presence is real.
Well, what I was saying is the contradiction is in the question. We went from 41 to 47 with a world in total, complete darkness about anything happening. The governments were being that effective. Anybody who came forward with any description, that's when they trotted out counter intel that would say it was a hubcap thrown up in the air.
They still
or
say that.
When you get to 47, we have too many eyewitnesses because there were multiple of these sites. Some of them have even been accused of being something where you would have a purposeful crash put down so that we would end up getting the technology, and that this was a way, without scaring us, to get technology into our hands to advance us more.
But that would only advance the military.
If you say that any of this could have been the government at any time, the contradiction is huge superimposed silence to keep the public and the media deaf and blind. The only mistake, which is what opened up the floodgates, was the Colonel Blanchard in Roswell going and putting out that story that a disc like Kenneth Arnold crashed. Then what happens? The 8th Air Force and everybody comes in and says, no, it was a weather balloon, go away, there's no story here. They had to lie and start lying and keep up policies of lying because they got caught in trying to keep a camouflage of silence. So what I'm saying is every single thing that was happening was to keep the public and the media deaf and blind about anything.
Which they still do.
But once there was an honest crash with multiple eyewitnesses, military putting out a story, they were caught in a brand new situation. And the only way that they have ever been able to deal with anything since is policies of denial and lies. And I'm sitting in front of you saying that I have talked with somebody who has been able to prove to me their Air Force record and what they did, and that they have told me about a face-to-face with one of the Ebens, a very, very dramatic story, in which their own military authority came and said, we want you to have the experience of a face-to-face.
But why would such a man, or several people actually, tell you that? Why would they confide in you?
They are angry.
So they tell you because you're working in this field, you're investigating this, you're talking publicly about it.
They trust me.
But why would they do that? You're exposing it. You're going against it.
That's exactly what they want. We are sitting, probably more whistleblowers have come forward in the last 2 years than ever before.
Right.
Because they are so angry that they have devoted their lives in the military for protecting the United States of America, and they know because they have been ordered to lie. They have seen UFOs, they have been on a security approach, they know that this is real, and that they become disgusted that we are still living on a planet where the big lie is that there's nothing going on, go away, there is no alien presence, when thousands of people have had hands on and know, whether it was radar or in the field or Iraq when they encountered non-humans out in the desert, whatever the story, there are all these people who know a completely different truth.
Right.
And they know that the governments of this planet are lying all of the time.
Yeah.
And it only is with people like me that come forward and say, I want to report only the facts and the truth, and you can come to me and you can trust. I will protect your anonymity as long as you bring to me your DD-214 and any certificates that you have done in your military career, and that I get to see what your birth date looks like, and that birth certificate, and that I then have a real human being.
Doesn't that contradict what you just said? What my question was, because you said the government is covering all of this up. They are lying. They cannot be trusted with this.
Right.
Right. But doesn't that contradict the fact that you're talking about government official papers? That we can use leaked papers that can be like used as a statement.
It's the whistleblowers that have leaked them. It's the whistleblowers
Like
who have had
Reagan.
access to them.
Right, Reagan.
No,
Camp
Reagan
David.
is allegedly an official briefing for that president specifically to introduce to him different types of non-humans because there are problems.
Mm-hmm.
It is not an all peaceful situation. There are threats. In the Ronald Reagan alleged, and I keep using the word alleged, because I've only had a source in Washington say, yes, this did occur at Camp David. I cannot prove, and I'm a stickler as a journalist to that which I can prove and that which I can't, so this is alleged. The Ebens are the creators of a variety of life forms, and they seed other solar systems and other planets.
So they're the most powerful.
I don't think there's a human on Earth, I don't care what their position is, who understands the relationships of these beings. All we can say is that the pear-shaped head ones that the government calls the Ebens make others. It took a while for our government to catch on. You could have a crash and you could have clone bodies, or you could have something that looks like this or
and
that.
Cloned bodies, just a footnote, cloned bodies could be these gray types that we've seen in movies and the usual ones that we always see.
A cloned body, doesn't matter color, size. When you say a cloned body means that
anything.
under a microscope, the doctors have confirmed that the DNA is identical.
Okay.
So when they do a report and say there were 2 clones at Cape Girardeau, Missouri, that means they were medically examined, and that was the conclusion. We, on the Earth, in 1941, you find for me and name any human cloning project by Homo sapiens. The medical recording and report that the 2 bodies retrieved from the Cape Girardeau crash were clones. Humans were not cloning anything in 1941. When you go beyond on that list, so you have the Ebens, then you have the Archeloids. It says they made them. The Ebens made the Archeloids, and that one of the conclusions based on the large noses, the rods, is that this is a handmade genetic, maybe an experiment by the Ebens, that ended up being one of the ruling classes in Mesopotamia at some point in history. That's the implication.
With their own individuality.
As a species.
As a
We
species.
are a
Genetically
manipulation. It says these extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates. The precursor of Lucy in Africa would be that category. Mm-hmm. So Lucy is the first of the primates that stands up. That was the big deal. The zoology and archaeology and anthropology groups of this planet will say a female that they call Lucy stood up. That was the first evolutionary change on the so-called tree of Homo sapien. Then, from Lucy, over 2 million years, we have had all of these different models that have included the Denisovans and Neanderthals and now Cro-Magnon, Homo sapien sapien. And when that guy from the DIA says you might as well think of the evolutionary history of Homo sapien on this planet. But once Lucy stands up, that is, we'll call it genetic manipulation number 1. if we are now Homo sapien sapien, and we're the only life that has two sapien, all of the creatures before us, Neanderthalensis back to Lucy, we're the Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien. We're the only species that has been given by humans as sapien sapien. We're the latest model, is what the DIA guy was saying. So if you go back, the average is 35 to 45,000 years. And you have, here's Neanderthal. And Denisovans are actually in a part of Eastern Europe. And then you have overlaying Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien. This model overlapped Neanderthal and some Denisovans, but they go extinct.
How do we know all this? Just briefly.
From studying bones and DNA in their papers, hundreds of papers every year.
That's official history, right?
Yeah. So
how can we count on that?
Well, you have to say that science is not science and that
it
can't be proved. And,
well, is it?
Well, you take this on as a challenge. Try to prove every DNA analysis and report on this planet.
What about DNA junk?
Well,
which they now say is not junk at all.
Yeah, it's not junk. Every medical science, we didn't have a genome for Homo sapien sapien until about 12 years ago. Google this. The Human Genome Project. This was a huge, expensive deal to get a genome is the whole word of all of the letters. Yeah. Genes are the letters. We did not have any genome of Homo sapien sapien until about 12 years ago. The breakthrough in terms of having what we are as gene letters making up the word or sentence of the human is very new. And as soon as that happened, Pablo Svante in Germany, he was one of the first to get an elbow from a Neanderthalensis that had been preserved in a cave underground at a temperature of 43 degrees Fahrenheit. It was perfect. And that was a huge breakthrough. It was the first time that they were getting a genome from Neanderthalensis and they could lay it out and compare to the human genome. This is all just since the end of the 90s. There were 19 major genetic differences between the overlapping Neanderthalensis and the overlapping Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien. And the question that hung in the air with that report was, he said he did not think there had been any intercourse between Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon because of these major differences. Today, the argument is that there was some kind of sexual intercourse. But Pablo Svante still says that the differences between Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon are so big. Where would Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien have come from if there was no intercourse with Neanderthalensis?
Would that be from a different race, alien race?
The briefing paper shown to me at Kirtland Air Force Base when I was working on the HBO project said in bold words on this document, extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates, which could be Denisovans, Neanderthalensis. The first standing up primate on Earth, defined by our science, is Lucy 2 million years ago. And the briefing papers on the non-human interaction with the planet would say the possibility is that Lucy stood up because of manipulation by extraterrestrial biological entities.
All right.
The scientists don't try to explain why Lucy stood up. They just go 2 million years ago in Africa and say, here is the earliest ancestor to a standing up primate.
Right.
What I've been exposed to is, yes, the whole standing up primate group of life have come in a whole bunch of models because extraterrestrial biological entities have been mixing and matching genes for at least 2 million years, creating a whole series of models. We're the latest one. And that's when the DIA guy said, you might as well think about the evolution of standing up primates, humans, as being 15 different Hoover vacuum cleaners. Because whatever it was, if it is extraterrestrial manipulation of Earth, there was a reason that they wanted to manipulate the DNA.
Why?
In that. Well, that's a very good question. And when you get up to the Anunnaki and the Sumerians and that whole huge Mesopotamian puzzle, Sitchin reading cuneiform and Chris Hardy, the French writer, reading cuneiform, they will say that the cuneiform explains that these extraterrestrials, meaning non-humans from someplace else in the universe, when they came here, they wanted gold. This is the Sitchin point of view. This is the Chris Hardy point of view.
Do you believe in Sitchin's point of view?
Oh, God, yes. I knew him and talked to him about this at great length. His position was that extraterrestrials, just like we on Earth, gold is an extremely valuable element throughout the universe. And not all planets or suns are going to have a lot of gold. And that if you read all 12 of Sitchin's books and translations, if you read Chris Hardy's...
But where did Sitchin get his information from? A lot of people say that he was involved in, let's say, secret societies, and he got a lot of information from there.
I don't know. I only know him from meeting him at the Rockefeller Center in New York back in around 1982 or 83. The first book, The 12th Planet, had only come out in 1979. I had done A Strange Harvest. I called up his office, said I wanted to come and meet him and talk with him about extraterrestrials manipulating genetic material because of what I had encountered as a nonfiction.
So nobody knows really where he got his information from.
He would say, if he were sitting here, that it was his curiosity about the clay stamped with the stars, planets, that was a different number than what we would have thought people 5,000 or 6,000 years ago would have known.
And history is much older, obviously,
well,
than what we're led to believe.
The Defense Intelligence Agency guy that I've talked to, who I think had the most information of all, was December 1999, 7 hours we talked.
How long did he say Earth
he
history
said
over?
that our government had proof that three competing geopolitical, territorial, conflicting is the word he used, meaning fighting, extraterrestrial civilizations had been interacting with this planet for at least 270 million years. And that's the one when I said, sir, that's before the time of the dinosaurs. And he said, well, one of them did an 80 million year laboratory experiment with the dinosaurs. If we're on that kind of scale,
then it's a different story.
And this version only has existed for 35,000 or 40,000. Now, I'm talking about this specific modern human. You can say the human construct goes back. So, we are the latest model. And if you add it all up, we are the product of extraterrestrial manipulation of DNA on an ongoing basis to create what? What is Homo sapiens sapien?
A slave race?
I don't know that we're slaves, but I know we're manipulated. But to what end?
To serve a global agenda, the New World Order agenda?
The New World Order, to me, would only be one facet.
A lot of people are talking about some species behind the New World Order and the elitists behind the government.
If that guy was right and there are three competing means,
Yes.
this, three competing geopolitical, territorial, conflicting. That's like we say, Russia is a geopolitical, territorial conflictor of the United States. China is a geopolitical, territorial, conflicting entity of Russia and the United States.
But they're all controlled by the New World Order, right? If we talk about on Earth, China, Russia, America, Europe.
It's not provable to me.
It's not provable to you.
That there is a New World Order that is controlling everything. I would argue that
but
there
all the
is no evidence.
presidents and the leaders of the world talked about it publicly.
The
It's on
1%,
record.
that there's a 1% controller of the money barter system. But controlling money, that controls a lot of the dynamics of the earth, but it has nothing to do with the souls. It
Mind
has
control.
nothing to do, no, but
A collective mind control.
There's more to the human than the body.
Linda Moulton Howe moved with her husband and daughter to Denver, Colorado. She was hired to be the director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver, where she did documentary films and news segments before finally making her famous documentary film A Strange Harvest in 1979, about animal mutilations that eventually led her on the track of discovering alien experimentation on animals and the alien presence on planet Earth. Her camera crew had found the dead mutilated animals in the Kansas Midland area, and while trying to shoot for a documentary, they soon discovered that their film equipment wouldn't work.
The battery belts would not stay charged. That was it. For me,
Really?
I want to find out what would be happening anywhere that would, if they had 8 or 10 battery belts, and they would be working for New York, and they are driving 100 or 200 miles from a town to go out to where animals are lying, and there's no blood and there's no tracks, and there's not a single battery belt.
So there was a frequency there.
Well, it had me hooked. I want to find out, what is this?
Right.
So we finished that film, and in September, I began making phone calls. And the first person from being director of special projects at the CBS station that I wanted to go talk to was Sheriff Tex Graves, Logan County, Northern Colorado. He was famous in that part of the country. He had been a sheriff, very trusted, very John Wayne type of guy. And it's up near the Wyoming border, and there had been a lot of mutilations on the Wyoming side and the Colorado side, and I drove up there, and he had dates going back to 71, 72. I'm seeing him in September 79.
With animal mutilations as well?
And he put this box down in front of me. And I said, sir, would you mind? I like to order things chronologically. I like to see the timeline. So I counted, there were 266 color Polaroid shots. And I put them all out, because some of them might be 6 or 10 shots of the same animal, and others might be 1 or 2. And that day in his shop is when I began to move through Alice in Wonderland's mirror. When you find an animal that's dead, and it's surrounded by like face powder, it's thin face powder. There's nothing growing, no grass, just thin face powder type dust. And here is an animal. It's lying on its right side. The ear, the left ear, it's always the sky-facing side of the animal that has the excisions. Ear missing, eye, often a circle of tissue taken right down to the bone, perfect circle, like with a protractor. If you open the mouth where the jaw has been removed down to clean bone, ask any veterinarian how do you get the cartilage off of a jawbone of a cow, a horse, a deer, anything? And they'll say you have to boil it off.
This could not have been done by humans.
Oh, this is what we're coming up to, is my looking at these photos and talking with the sheriff, and this is my first meeting. What I was puzzling about was that the head of all of the photos, it was the only one, the head is down in a hole.
In the same direction?
It's lying like this, and the arms, but the head is not on flat ground. There's an actual hole, and the head is in this hole.
Like they froze? Or?
Well, I picked up these Polaroids and I went to the sheriff and I said, could you explain to me what you think happened here? And he was puffing on a cigarette, and I remember he blew out smoke and said, yeah, that's one that haunted me forever. I had nightmares. What do you think happened? He said, well, when the deputy and I got to this one, we could see that it was just powdery ground, and we could not, as we are approaching, we could not see tracks. So I said to him, let's take photos like about 12 feet out, which is what I began to do as well. You don't walk into the scene, you photograph out the scene, and then you know, as you photograph in, you know the spiral, and wherever you see evidence, you don't go on it. So there was not a single track. And he said, when we got up to the head, and we're looking at what we have seen in other mutilations, the ear, the eye, the tongue, and the jaw. The jaw is stripped and the tongue is always removed this far deep. You can open up an animal, I've done this many times. You can't see any of the tongue root. It's been completely removed deep in the throat. In this case, a male, it had a neat oval where it was only hide deep and the rectum poured out. And he said the only thing that we could conclude is that whatever did this had the ability to paralyze this animal, and maybe for experimentation, left the head to move in the agony of what was happening. And he said, we think that the animal, while all of the other parts were removed, that it dug in its agony this 8-inch hole. He said, we measured it. It was 8 inches deep. This animal dug with its head an 8-inch deep hole where the legs were like this. There was not even a mark, not a mark in the dust. And he sat back and he said to me, I'll save you some time, Linda. The perpetrators of these animal mutilations are creatures from outer space. I honestly can remember that moment. I felt exactly like some kind of electric current hit me with pain. I was so stunned. I was so astonished. It was in that office with Sheriff Tex Graves, recently retired, all of those Polaroids, and that case of the animal that dug a hole, that Linda Moulton Howe went through the Alice in Wonderland mirror. When I drove back to my home in Littleton, Colorado that night, it was a 2.5-hour drive. The sky had been my friend since I was old enough to have a telescope at age 4 and go outdoors. I had spent so much of my life at night under the stars with telescopes and astronomy clubs. And I can remember starting to get into my car and looking up at the sky for the first time in my life, feeling nervous. And the whole 2.5 hours back home, I had a sunroof. I actually ended up closing my sunroof because I became so aware what could be up there that is doing this to these animals.
Had you ever thought about an alien presence or UFOs before?
No.
Or life in the universe?
I think I assumed that the this whole universe to be empty, that never made any sense to me. But I am now in my early 30s and married and with a child and a family, and I have lived the normal life up until that day and that night.
That was a wild awakening then.
Well, this is I call it going through Alice in Wonderland's mirror. Because once you've done that,
yes,
you can never go back through the mirror again. You have been changed.
Right.
And what happened over the next 9 months? My crew and I, we traveled for 1 solid month in the station wagon with a whole bunch of gear. And I was living by literally the seat of my pants, going day by day, making phone calls, lining up people that would be referenced, and the crew and I spent a month. And in that period of time, we saw a red light come up over a butte where there had been a whole series of mutilations. And the cameraman and the audio man and I and the rancher saying, yeah, that's one of those UFOs. And in me was, I don't know what I'm looking at until. This has absolutely happened. If my
but
crew
you saw
was in,
this.
The red light, cherry tomato red, comes right up over the butte where this man had had half a dozen animal mutilations. And it stops, and the cameraman and this has stopped. And I said, this cannot be astronomical because there are no planets, no stars that come up and stop. And then it went straight down exactly where it had come from. And at that point, I said to my cameraman, we've just seen the first UFO, an unidentified flying object that the rancher is saying with great confidence is responsible for the mutilations. Okay.
So that was not a ship, it was a light.
Red, cherry, tomato. That's what we could see.
And could that be a rescue sign, as you know that they use from ships on the ocean? Sometimes they send up a rescue sign.
We're in Wyoming. There's no water, oceans of any kind.
But could that be military, for example?
Well, you can sit and split hairs all day long. And I'm sitting in front of you now, 39 years later. And the paths that I have walked and what I have seen and the people that I have talked to who will never be on a camera because they have signed non-disclosure agreements working for the military or for the government of the United States, but some of them have had face-to-face with extraterrestrial biological entities. So I am talking back through a long lens of nearly 4 decades and sharing with you how it started for me.
And a long history of investigating all of this.
In those 9 months, in working on that documentary, A Strange Harvest, that did get a regional Emmy and was the largest audience of any program produced by the CBS station in Denver in its history.
And it was shown nationwide.
No, this is Colorado, Wyoming. This was when you are producing for a station in Denver, Colorado.
Right.
The broadcast will go to the states around you.
Okay.
It's not New York, LA, where they would be producing for a network.
Right.
But Denver, in that region, there's a big population. And we got a 19 rating and a 37 share back then. That's how TV was measured. And no one has ever had anything like that before or since. And what I realized is the next day when they start bringing in bags of, the next week, bags of letters, because back then there's no computers, there's no faxes. You had landline telephones and you had letters and maybe a telegram.
Everything took a long time.
Yeah, the reaction, the human population reaction to my film, A Strange Harvest, was huge. And underneath the surface, it was as if I had scratched the surface, because all of the material that started coming to the TV station was, I've never told anyone this before. And then it was another animal mutilation story, a human abduction story, people who were talking about going from their back door of their ranch house and having something glowing in the sky that puts down a beam, white or red, surrounding them and feeling their body go up. Mm-hmm. A technology that was not known. The clincher on the whole evidentiary scene of all these animals that I ended up collecting went out many times by myself with formalin solution, a scalpel or scissors, and I would collect the mutilator's excision, the sheriff's excision, often they were cutting with scissors or a knife or something, and mine. So I would be collecting from the field tissue that was the mutilator's excision, my excision, and the sheriff's excision, and labeling them so that it was very clear, and working with a pathologist, hematologist on dozens of these. And one day he called me and he said, I want you to come over to the lab and I want you to see something. And he had a stereoscopic microscope. And he said, on the right side, I went to a gynecologist friend. Laser surgery has not been something in this world for very long. And he said, this is a gynecology laser excision on the right. And on the left is tissue from this animal that you had just sent me tissue from. He said, just tell me, what do you see is the biggest difference between the two? So I'm looking, and I realize that on the right, the gynecology, it looks like a whole lot of black pepper grains. And when I looked at the mutilation, I couldn't find any. And that's what I said to Dr. Outschiller. And when I told him what I was seeing as the difference, he said, bingo, that's it. We are a carbon-based life form on this planet. All life is carbon-based. You cannot take a laser or heat to the tissue of a carbon-based life form without having carbon residue from that heat. The black pepper grains are carbon-based residue. The animal has none. So what was the cutting instrument? To this day, in 2018, I cannot answer that question.
Could that be military technology that they may have had for a long time, maybe retrieved from UFO crashes, say Roswell and before? You've mentioned earlier in your speeches about a UFO crash in 1941
in Missouri.
As well, in Missouri. I mean, and the military may have obtained and acquired this technology.
Okay, I'm going to give you the one case that refutes all of those arguments. It was in Elizabeth, Colorado, south of Denver. Husband and wife, farmers. They have 30 cows pregnant. They deliberately put the pregnant cows 1/4 of a mile from the front door. And the whole day, the husband and wife are outside with ladders and paint, painting the outside of their house 1/4 from where they have 30 pregnant females. At about 5 o'clock, the husband says, I'm going to go pick up some hay and bring it back to these cows. He's in a what they call a high bed or high seat in a truck. So walking on the ground, they can't see into this sloping pasture. But now up in his rig, he looks out because they have concern about these 30 pregnant cows. They're going to have to deal with all these births. So he looks out and he sees one of the cows down. He still goes to where he gets the hay, and remember, there are no cell phones. So he uses a phone where he picks up the hay and calls his wife and says, I think one of our cows is down birthing, go check. She comes out, he still hasn't come back, and what she is looking at is a white-bellied pregnant cow where half a perfect shoe heel has been removed from the udder. There is no blood. There is no fluid. The sky-facing eye is about 3 times the size, which happens in these cases often because we think that they are experiencing a radiation of some sort. The eye is bulging, and the rectum is cored out, and half of this udder, and these photos are in my books, in Alien Harvest and in Glimpses Volume 2. And she was so shocked, she ran back to the house and got a camera. That's how we have these photographs. Her husband comes, and they stand there, and she's taking photos, and they cannot believe it because they can't comprehend. How would you get half of an udder from a cow about ready to give birth without there being fluid everywhere? And there's nothing. They saw the cows completely normal, alive, and healthy, all 30 at noon.
Right.
He left at 5. They were outdoors the entire noon to 5 period. There is no way that anything of a human nature in any way could have come into that pasture, a quarter of a mile from them, without the other cows making sounds they would have heard. And the conclusion of everybody who has ever seen this case, and I have presented this as one of the classic examples, whatever happened had to come from the sky, had to be able to work on this one cow without the rest of the cows going crazy. And so, where does it lead you? To what ranchers going all the way back into the 70s have reported. Ranchers have seen circular glowing discs or craft put a beam down into a pasture, and they've seen one of two things. They've either seen an animal being lowered down a beam of light, scares them to death, and they wait until sun up to go see what has happened. And the other is, a few ranchers have actually seen an animal picked up out of a pasture, and the same thing. They are scared to death. They go back to their ranch house. And in these cases where there have been eyewitness testimony of seeing animals rise or lower in beams, and they wait until sunup to go, where they saw the animal lowered, always ear missing, eye, tongue, jaw, genitals, and rectum, and no blood. Now, there is one other thing that you need to hear that separates your question about a military operation. The first animal mutilation that Sheriff Tex Graves in Logan County was called out to, and he'd been to several hundred by the time I talked with him in 1979. But he told me, he said, we were getting 2 or 3 calls a day. We were getting to these animals warm to touch. And at first I was mystified by the fact that we couldn't find tracks. But Linda, this is where it really began in terms of that, which is impossible to understand.
And how about humans? Did anyone?
No. What people have seen have been silver discs, beams of light. There's always been
But no
light.
humans being beamed up in this.
Well, there's a case, that's a sidebar. Let me tell you this, because you need to have this. Sheriff Tex Graves gets to one of these warm animals in Colorado, and he calls a veterinarian. And he said, I want you to come out here and do a necropsy right here. I want it as fresh and fast as possible. And he said, the veterinarian, and I've done this myself, you start taking an animal apart methodically like you would a car if you're a guy. And he said, now the veterinarian is into the chest of this animal and says, Sheriff, I want you to take a look at this. And he has on gloves, plastic gloves. And the sheriff sees him raise up his index finger and sees that there is something that's glistening over his index finger. And he doesn't understand what he's looking at. And he said, "What is that?" And the vet says, "This is the pericardium that surrounds the cow's heart. You have a pericardium around your heart. All mammals have pericardiums. I want you to look here." And the sheriff bends down, and the vet said, "There's no heart." In a normal adult cow, the average size heart is 7 by 11 by 9 inches. And there's no heart inside of this big cow. Not only is there no heart, the vet shows the sheriff there's no fluid, there's no blood, there's no clotted blood, and the pericardium that he's got over his gloved index finger, "Sheriff, there's not even a hole. There's no excision. I have been feeling this pericardium. Sheriff, how did anyone get this cow's heart out of this pericardium and out of the chest? There was not one excision mark in the chest, anywhere that would have been necessary to go in, even in a necropsy, and get the heart out."
Obviously, this is incredible. This is unbelievable that this
you.
could happen. And that led you to go on the path of understanding that there are forces in the universe who are able to do this and to have technology and have a power that we simply do not have here.
Exactly.
And that led you on the path of investigating human abductions
And everything else.
and everything else.
Because once you start on the path of trying to get to the bottom of what a sheriff tells you, the perpetrators are creatures from outer space, which creatures, who, what, where, why, what would be the agenda, why would anything from outer space
then there
be
are
on
more questions than answers, right?
And eventually, if you looked at my life and every step that I have taken, 1,000 paths that grew out of trying to find out what was happening to those animals. And as the thousands of paths grew and took me around the world, and I was investigating animal mutilations, and the human abduction syndrome is a big part of this.
Yes.
But a lot of people ask me, well, if something from outer space is mutilating animals, what about mutilating humans?
Exactly.
I'm going to give you the most honest answer I can. I do not, Dr. Altshuler did not have. I do not know of any investigator. I'm not talking about the government. I'm talking about those of us, myself, doing all of this work in the field. I don't have any hard proof. I don't have a coroner's report. I don't have a hospital report. I don't have any hard evidence that humans have been found with an ear, eye, tongue, jaw, genitals, and rectum cored out from a medical or legal or military or police category.
In any similar way than what you saw with the animals.
But one day I got a phone call from somebody in Missouri, and it led to my calling Dr. Altshuler and saying, apparently we've got a naked man, and it's an ear, eye, tongue, jaw, genitals, and rectum cored out. Can you call the coroner's office and see if you can get a confirmation of what we have found? Look at the excisions and see if the excisions were done with the high heat that we have been able to document in animals. And Dr. Altshuler, with all of his background, calls up the coroner in this little place in Missouri, introduces himself, says what we had been doing, and the coroner said, "I can't talk to you," and hung up on him. And when John Altshuler called me, the whole bottom line is, it's difficult for any person any journalist, anyone trying to get to what are the provable, documented facts in a phenomenon like animal mutilations, if that man had been subjected to exactly what the sheriff told me, mutilations by creatures from outer space. Do I think this is happening all over the planet? No, I do not. In the 39 years that I've been trying to get to the bottom of the facts, maybe a half a dozen cases that if it were happening like to the animals, which is hundreds and hundreds a year in 2 hemispheres, we would hear about it. And it might be put in the category of homosexual murders. But we would still hear if there were a lot of human bodies that were being subjected to high heat that could not be explained, right? So whatever is happening, whatever the agenda is of the alien presence, it does seem to make a difference. Humans are in one category. The animals are in another category. Marine life are in another category. And that then comes to why would there be human abductions? And I think the reason is we are treated differently as a surface earth life from the cows, the horses, the goats, the sheep, the chickens, the rabbits, the foxes.
Because of our intelligence.
Well,
or spiritual level.
Remember there was, maybe we hadn't talked about it in this interview, I started to say, if the planet has been a laboratory for millions of years, which is my bottom line in understanding from people in government, millions of years, and if the document that I was shown at Kirtland Air Force Base here in Albuquerque back on April 9th, 1983, I had been contracted and hired by Home Box Office to do an hour documentary. The working title was UFOs, the E.T. Factor, to follow up my documentary on the mutilations of Strange Harvest. This is what I'm doing. I'm a producer, writer, director, editor, and a reporter, and I am working on an hour special for Home Box Office when I get a meeting with a man at the Air Force Office of Special Investigations in Albuquerque. And I think I'm there to get some names and phone numbers on a very dramatic case in Ellsworth, and I'm going to flesh this out for HBO. And instead, he says, my superiors have asked me to show you this document. You can read it, but you cannot write questions. You can't write in a notebook, but you can ask me questions, and I want you to move from the chair you're sitting in to that one. I was so naive and so green that the idea that I was being asked to move in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations at Kirtland Air Force Base so they could videotape and audio tape me more clearly for their alphabet soup needs, which I know is now what happened. But inside of these approximately 10 or 12 type pages, a briefing paper for the President of the United States on the subject of unidentified aerial vehicles, and it also used unidentified aerial craft, UAVs, UACs instead of UFOs. After going through some of the history of Roswell, I came to a paragraph that is as clear in my mind's eye now as it was then. These extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien. And it went down a couple of more sentences. And the last page said Project Garnet. I said, remember Garnet because that's your birth date, Stone. Project Garnet. All questions and mysteries about the evolution of Homo sapien on this planet have been answered, and this project is closed. And as I sit in front of you now, at the beginning of 2018, I can tell you what I think is the answer to how I could possibly, in 1983, have been reading a presidential briefing that said all questions and mysteries about the evolution of Homo sapien have been answered.
Yes.
The evolution of standing up primates on this planet is equivalent to our creating 19 different versions of Hoover vacuum cleaners. And we just happen to be the latest model.
What happens? What happens to us, human beings, when we die?
I was able to communicate through people with a man who had prostate cancer in San Antonio at a military hospital, and he was the Air Force captain at a crash in '49, in which, as he approached the crash with other men, his mind was suddenly filled with screaming at a high pitch, images he couldn't understand. It stopped him in his tracks. And when he stopped, the other men stopped. And he's totally disoriented. And they're already saying, "Sir, there are dead bodies here." And he is saying, something alive is communicating with me. And as they walked forward following, the captain said that he felt as if some kind of a pressure or a force pulled his very body so that his head could only look on an angle. It even affected the angle.
Was he
and then
dead or
what
alive?
he sees are glistening pieces under rubble that are the eyes of a creature. And they take the rubble off, and it is a live being, an Eben. At that location, he is told by a higher authority, "You will now be the one who stays with this entity for as long as it takes." And they go to Los Alamos. And until June 18th, 1952, this Air Force captain lived with this Eben. All telepathic. But I have been told that every day, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, they would bring in a 16mm film camera, and they would set the military guy next to the Eben, just like Charlie McCarthy. And the Eben would put information into the human mind because he had that talent. Our government looks for what they call translators. Being very skilled with telepathy doesn't happen to most people, and they look for people who have this talent.
Many clairvoyants say that they can speak to alien
Maybe,
beings
but
or
it's telepathy.
guides.
Telepathy is the key. Telepathy is a process. And in this communication that they did all the time, and it is supposed to be vaulted, in his hearing about the physics of these beings and what happened in the crash, one of the issues was exactly your question. What happens at the moment of death?
Yes.
And the being telepath, the recycling of souls, reincarnation, is the machinery of this universe. Since hearing that, and having had a lot of discussions with a lot of other people about this whole thing, one of the growing consensus of investigators is whatever is the conflict, whatever is a secret war, whatever has been going on this planet for 270 million years, there are beings that are studying where the human soul goes at the moment of death because they cannot enter that dimension.
They cannot enter that dimension. Really?
And what are the implications of that?
What's the dimension?
All of us would like to understand dimensions. It's been described to me by a physicist.
Is that the great white light, what religions call heaven?
A physicist who worked at Area 51 for a long time can describe the elevator systems that are made so nobody can get down into the lower levels unless they have codes and keys. That's how they secure Area 51. And he told me, he said, if you put your hands together and then just bring them up a little, that space in between your palms of your hands, that's our universe of matter. Right on the edge of your skin is the first closest dimension. And we call it the astral. But he said it is the closest dimension. And in that dimension, there's a lot of entropy.
Is that the fourth dimension?
The key word is entropy. If you have a dimension surrounding the universe, and we're in a universe, entropy is the winding down of energy to death. Only in a universe or a dimension dominated by entropy would you have death, war, dark. And he said beyond that closest dimension, he knew about 15. He said, think of a Russian doll. They're nested in each other. He said, it's my understanding that the problem in this universe that may have been made specifically to be a trainer of souls, so that they would always be juxtaposed to a dimension that had entropy and dark, penetrating frequencies, always trying to get into this universe.
What are they?
And that what is the fight back, what neutralizes them, is love, is light, and life.
That dark energy you're talking about, is that the archons?
See, these names that come up in the literature, outside of the Eben and the Archeloid and the Heptaloid and the Trontoloid in the Reagan briefing paper, those are
How
names.
about reptilians?
Nothing,
the Dracos?
nothing comes up like that.
Really?
So when you come to different types, like for example, I have interviewed, I think now, over 1,500 people in the abduction syndrome. And I have illustrations from just about everybody because I asked. I can do a taxonomy like I did in Glimpses Volume 1 and 2. And it breaks down into generally gray-skinned or white skin, pure white, pure white. White is a white cotton sheet. You can have gray types, whites, different heights, different colors of hair or no hair. You can come to the Nordic blondes. They can be short, they can be tall. You can come to a reptilian group that can be a range of small to high, different colored skins, some with pebbly skin like a lizard, some with scales. You get all of these different variations.
Can they shapeshift? Just a brief...
There are descriptions, yeah. There
so
are.
You think that can happen?
But the Reagan 5 are the only alleged official document that we have
but there
of the
could
government.
Be many more.
Well, but of the government breaking it down.
Mm-hmm.
What is interesting is they don't say anything specifically about there being reptilians, but if the Ebens are creating the next archeloids, the archeloids have reptilian eyes. This is why these questions need to be refined with more complexity. The Ebens might not technically be reptilian as we have reptilians on the Earth. But if the Ebens are mixing and matching genes with any and all life forms on the planet, the possibility that they would take an alligator's genes of some sort, pieces of, and put it together with a praying mantis insect, and put it together with a chimpanzee, and look to us like snake eyes. But it doesn't mean that the Ebens are necessarily reptilian. The mixing and matching of the genes is being done in the surface life of this planet.
But what about the theory that a lot of people talk about within these circles, that the reptilian race believe that they are the ancient ones, they are the original ones, their DNA doesn't change over time, that's why they feel they are entitled, and that's why they feel that they have to survive, and they don't have like empathy, like we do. Which is why they say they are behind the governments, because they want to take over, to control. They believe they were here first.
Why would there be any literature, a Zohar, a Bible, any of the so-called religious boxes literature? And there are all these garden stories. And in the garden are the innocent humans. Mm-hmm. And who's teaching them? Who is teaching humans?
So do you believe that the reptilian race is like a wise and a good thing?
Well, let's answer this. If there is a Garden of Eden as a common mythology in cultures around the world, and if in that garden there is
a story,
it's a common, right? Yeah, but aren't the mythologies of all of the ancient races supposed to reflect what it was they saw, what they heard, what they dealt with, what they dreamed, what were nightmares?
It was in code,
but
right?
If the Garden of Eden is about the beginning consciousness of this new model called Homo sapien sapien Cro-Magnon, and if the teacher to Homo sapien Cro-Magnon, to Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien, is a serpent, then what is the role of a reptilian intelligence to the new model Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien on the earth? The Ebens may have been doing the first kind of experimentation in a lab, and those were the dinosaurs, which are reptilian. And then they have done a whole reptilian experiment on the earth for reasons that we have no idea. The dinosaurs are taken out by what? An incoming asteroid that crashed in the Gulf of Mexico and made the Chicxulub crater. And there are arguments about whether that is really why the dinosaurs ended. But what comes next? Mammals. Mammals were the tiny little creatures in those 80 million years of dinosaurs. And as soon as the dinosaurs are gone, this line comes up of mammals. And we
because
are at the
dinosaurs
top.
and human beings cannot evolve on the same planet at the same time,
I don't
right?
know, but to me, another possibility. If the Reagan document is correct, and there are 5, if the DIA guy who talked to me is correct, 3 competing geopolitical, territorial experimenters on Earth, then one genetic experiment by the Ebens can become something completely different if one of their enemies or somebody who they don't even know about comes to Earth, takes their experiment, does their own interaction, and pretty soon maybe all of the competing extraterrestrials become very pissed off at each other because they're trying each to do laboratory experiments on this planet, and others keep messing up their genetic strains. So maybe humans are a shock. And I think there is something about us that is a shock to them all. And that comes to that question, what happens to the human soul at the moment of death? Because it's possible. In the Gnostic literature and in the philosophy of theosophy, there is this consensus that in the Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien is a soul that may be unique because of all of the genetic mixing and matching leading up to us. But we have this problem. If all of the extraterrestrial mixing and matching of genes on Earth goes back 270 million or a billion, it doesn't matter. It's the issue of mixing and matching genes. And the DIA guy defines the Earth history for 270 million years as the conflict of 3 competing extraterrestrial groups. Then what they did with evolving life, including us, it might explain why Cro-Magnon Homo sapien sapien is so violent. Why are we always in states of war? Why are we competing and always challenged by murder and violence? Why? Our E.T.
Which is
makers,
orchestrated by our governments, right?
but if they're under the influence of competing, it's the competition.
Yes.
It's the competition. Do a triangle and you have 3 corners, and that they have been competing with each other for millions of years, and we're only 45,000 years old, but we do nothing but war.
That keeps our frequency down.
Is the violent nature of humans a key to why something made us and something else has been trying to change us?
Briefly, so when the soul leaves the body, we go through a tunnel of light, and we have an experience, what is referred to, we see the life review, we see our lives pass before our eyes, or whatever is the eyes of the soul, and then we enter the great white light at the end of the tunnel, where there's a feeling of bliss, and we are welcomed by loved ones who has gone before us. And that is according to numerous near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, and people who've even seen this. A lot of people say that this is a recycling factory, a reincarnation recycling factory, kind of a karma wheel for us to go back into a new body and a wiped memory, because we are soul food to those beings. A lot of them now call them the archons, a being that is interdimensional, not physical, because they feed on our soul. That is their food, like we eat and drink. How can we, if there's any truth to that, how can we escape that matrix, that construct within the matrix?
I think that there is a dimension that is constantly trying to penetrate this universe, and maybe because it is denied the ability to be in a matter body or a matter world, that it keeps trying to penetrate here. And it becomes a camouflage, it becomes a shadow, it becomes a darkness that can challenge humans when they are vulnerable in their mind and soul and body. What I really honestly think is the big truth in the big box. It comes from Thomas Campbell, a physicist who worked for the Army intelligence in the 70s and worked with Robert Monroe on the creation of the hemi-sync technology for going out of body. And in the last 5 or 6 years, I've come to know his work, and here is his bottom line as a physicist who has worked on all of these complicated matters. This is an entropy reduction trainer for soul universe, projected from another dimension on purpose. The souls that are in the various bodies in this universe are here for training. There is exactly the metaphor of the yin and the yang, with the black in the white and the white in the black on purpose. And that those who can get out of this universe after a certain number of recyclings, because they have been able to resist and reduce the influence of the dark in the nearest dimension, they then begin to go up other dimensions. And that it is the evolution of the soul that is the projection of the divine field that created all matter worlds in order to put itself out and see how much of itself would choose to come back.
So it boils down to a choice, awareness in us as a human being when we die. The soul awareness. When we die,
and
we can choose.
When we're alive, I feel that my soul...
So we can choose to go back, or because we are now aware that we can go to another place where we've become more complete?
It's not like sitting down on a piece of paper and saying, this is what I'm going to do this life, and this is what I'm going to be, and this is the dimension I go. The beauty of this system of an entropy reduction trainer is that the soul, the part that none of us seem to be acknowledging in this crazy world now, the soul is what has been driving every life from the beginning. The soul comes in with certain missions. When people go against whatever it is that they have internal gut feelings, when they have a sense that they should go this way instead of this way, for those that take their hunches and their gut feelings and their dreams, and that is the way they live, they end up, I believe, at a point at the moment of death going to a completely different dimension than the person who fights going this direction, who fights their dreams, who fights their inner knowing because other humans tell them that's not what you're supposed to do. And those are the ones, I think, who become alcoholic and drugged, and that they are in an angst. They will keep coming back around until they become strong enough as a soul to resist those dark shadows. So everything's headed toward the same door of light.
Linda, this has been incredible, and it's like Pandora's box just opening, and there are a million questions. There are so many things we did not have time to talk about, and there are so many things that you could tell us, and we could go on for hours, but unfortunately we don't have that much time right now. But I can just say that it's been very fascinating, and it's been very exciting. It's been great to meet you, and I want to thank you very much for doing this interview for Age of Truth TV. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Lucas, I wish you could have walked every step of my life to date.
It's been a fascinating and interesting life. And it's your birthday tomorrow,
yes.
So I want to say happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.